The morning after Elena Bennett rejected the offer, the world around her looked exactly the same. The sun still rose above the fields. The wind still moved through the crops. The old wooden barn still stood at the edge of the property. But Elena knew something had changed. Because sometimes the biggest battles do not begin with shouting. They begin with silence. A decision. A refusal. A moment when someone says, "No," and waits to see what happens next. For years, Bennett Farm had survived everything nature could bring. Storms. Droughts. Bad harvests. Hard seasons. But Elena was beginning to understand something her father had known long ago. The most difficult challenges were not always found in the soil. Sometimes they arrived wearing expensive suits, carrying contracts, and offering promises. By afternoon, the news had already spread. People in the small farming community were talking. Some admired Elena. Others thought she was making the biggest mistake of her life. At the local supply store, farmers gathered around the counter discussing the rumors. $12 million? One farmer shook his head. Nobody turns down that kind of money. Another replied, "Maybe she knows something we don't." But most people saw only one thing. A young farmer refusing an opportunity that might never come again. They did not know what Elena knew. They did not know about the journal. They did not know about William Bennett's research. They did not know that the corporation had not come because Bennett Farm was ordinary. They had come because it was different. 3 days later, Richard Whitmore returned. This time, he was not carrying an offer. He was carrying information. Elena invited him inside. But she noticed something immediately. Richard looked uncomfortable. Not angry. Not confident. Uncomfortable. "Elena," he said, "I want you to understand something." She waited. The corporation is not used to hearing no. Elena looked at him. "Neither am I." For the first time, Richard almost smiled. But then his expression became serious. "They have resources you don't have." Elena replied. "They have money." Richard nodded. "And money creates opportunities. But it also creates pressure." The first attack did not come through lawyers. It came through perception. Within days, articles began appearing online. Stories questioning Elena's decision. Stories suggesting she was preventing agricultural progress. The message was carefully designed. It did not say Elena was wrong. It simply made people wonder. Was one person standing in the way of something that could help millions? That was how powerful organizations fought. Not always by destroying opponents. Sometimes by changing how the world saw them. That night, Elena sat alone in the barn. The same place where her father used to repair equipment. The same place where she learned that farming was not just about planting seeds. It was about patience, responsibility, faith. She looked at an old photograph hanging on the wall. Her father standing in the field. Smiling. Confident. Certain. And for the first time since the battle began, Elena admitted something she had not wanted to admit. She was afraid. Not of losing money. Not of losing the farm. She was afraid of failing the person who trusted her most. Her father. After a while, Ava found Elena there. She did not ask questions. She simply sat beside her. After several minutes, Ava spoke. "Your father was afraid too." Elena looked surprised. "My father?" Ava smiled. "Of course he was. People think courage means not being afraid." She looked toward the fields. But courage is deciding something matters more than fear. Elena looked down. "How did he do it?" Ava answered. "He remembered who he was protecting." The following morning, Elena returned to the old farmhouse office. The same room where her father had spent countless nights studying the land. For years, she had believed this room represented the past. Old papers. Old tools. Old memories. But now she saw it differently. This was not a room filled with forgotten things. It was a room filled with unfinished answers. She placed William Bennett's journal on the desk. The leather cover was worn. The pages were fragile. But inside those pages was something more valuable than money. A lifetime of observation. A farmer's understanding of the land. Elena opened the journal again. This time, she did not search for a secret. She searched for a lesson. Inside the journal were years of notes. Not business plans. Not financial calculations. Observations. William Bennett recorded everything. The weather. The rainfall. The condition of the soil. The health of the crops. The behavior of insects. The changes in the land over seasons. Most farmers looked at a field and saw a place to grow crops. William saw something different. He saw a living system. A conversation between soil, plants, animals, water, and people. And slowly, over decades, he noticed something unusual. Bennett Farm recovered differently. When neighboring farms struggled after difficult seasons, his fields often recovered faster. When certain crops failed elsewhere, his crops continued producing. At first, William thought it was luck. Then he realized something. It was not luck. It was care. For generations, farmers understood something that modern agriculture sometimes forgot. Healthy farms begin below the surface. Before a plant reaches toward the sunlight, it depends on what happens underground. The soil is not just dirt. It is a complex environment filled with microorganisms, nutrients, organic matter, and life. William understood that. While others focused only on increasing production, he focused on protecting the foundation that made production possible. He practiced methods that many people ignored. Crop rotation. Instead of planting the same crop repeatedly, he changed what grew in each field. This helped maintain nutrients and reduce disease. Cover crops. During seasons when fields rested, he planted crops that protected the soil from erosion and helped return nutrients. Composting. He returned organic material back to the land instead of removing everything from the system. And careful water management. Because he understood something simple. A farm cannot be healthy if the land beneath it is exhausted. Then Elena found the pages about Field 7. The same field her father always protected. The same field he never allowed outside researchers to examine. For years, Elena thought it was because the field was difficult to access. She was wrong. Her father was protecting it because it represented everything he believed about farming. Field 7 was not special because it produced more. It was special because it showed what was possible. A farm that worked with nature instead of fighting against it. A system built through decades of patience. A lesson written into the land itself. Elena finally understood why the corporation wanted Bennett Farm. But she also understood something they did not. They thought the value was something they could extract. Something they could own. A formula. A product. A patent. But they misunderstood. Because Bennett Farm's greatest discovery was not a single thing. It was a relationship. A relationship built between generations of farmers and the land they protected. The corporation wanted the result. But they did not understand the process. Near the end of the journal, Elena found one final entry. The handwriting was different. Slower. As if her father had written it during his final months. It said, "Elena, if you are reading this, then someone has finally discovered what I spent my life protecting. Remember this. The land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. Anyone can buy property. But no one can buy generations of knowledge, patience, and care. Protect the lesson. Not just the land." Elena closed the journal. For the first time since this battle began, She understood the true responsibility she carried. Her father was never trying to protect a secret. He was trying to protect a principle. The corporation believed Bennett Farm contained something valuable. They were right. But they were wrong about what that value was. The greatest treasure beneath Bennett Farm was not hidden underground. It was knowledge. Knowledge passed from one generation to another. Knowledge that proved the future of farming was not about taking more from the earth. It was about learning how to protect it. And now Elena Bennett had a choice. Keep the discovery hidden, or share it with the world. For the first few days after discovering her father's research, Elena believed she was fighting a battle that belonged only to her. Bennett Farm. Her father's journal. Her family's responsibility. But she soon discovered something. Her story was not unique. Across the valley, other farmers had faced the same question. A simple question that had become more complicated with every passing year. How much is your land worth? For some people, the answer was measured in dollars. For others, it was measured in something much harder to explain. Memory, identity, purpose. And one person understood that better than anyone. Her name was Rose Madeline. Rose Madeline had spent most of her life being told she was wrong. When other ranchers moved toward faster-growing livestock, Rose chose a different path. She protected rare heritage cattle breeds. Animals that carried generations of history. Animals that required patience, care, understanding. People laughed. They called her old-fashioned. They told her she was wasting land on animals that could never compete with modern production. But Rose believed something different. She believed agriculture was not only about producing more. It was also about preserving what could disappear forever. Because once a breed was lost, once a farming tradition disappeared, no amount of money could bring it back. When Rose visited Bennett Farm, Elena expected advice. What she received was understanding. Rose looked across the fields. I heard they made you an offer. Elena nodded. I refused. Rose smiled. Good. Elena looked surprised. You don't even know the amount. Rose laughed quietly. Doesn't matter. She looked toward the soil beneath her boots. People like them always think farmers are protecting dirt. But we know better. Elena asked. What do we know? Rose answered. We know we are protecting time. But Rose was not the only person with a connection to William Bennett's work. There was still something Elena did not know about Ava Ashford. For decades, Ava had been more than a neighbor. She had been one of the few people who truly understood Elena's father. Years earlier, before corporations and investors started chasing agricultural discoveries, William Bennett and Ava had worked together. Not as business partners. As students of the land. They experimented. They observed. They learned. And together, they discovered something important. The land always gives signs. But only patient people notice them. Then there was Daniel Carter. For years, people saw Daniel as simply the man who maintained Bennett Farm. The person who repaired machines. Checked fences. Handled daily operations. But Elena discovered something she never knew. Daniel had quietly protected the farm during some of its hardest years. When money was tight. When others suggested selling. Daniel was the one who convinced her father to keep going. Not because the farm was profitable. Because it mattered. One evening, Daniel finally told Elena the truth. Your father almost sold this place once. Elena looked shocked. He did? Daniel nodded. He had a chance to walk away. Why didn't he? Daniel smiled. Because he remembered why he started. Word began spreading. Not about the money. Not about the corporation. About the discovery. Farmers who had once questioned Elena started asking different questions. They wanted to understand. They wanted to learn. Because many of them had spent years fighting the same invisible battle. Trying to balance survival with responsibility. Trying to produce enough while protecting the land that made production possible. Slowly, something changed. Bennett Farm was no longer just Elena's fight. It became a conversation about the future of farming. That night, Elena stood outside the barn. A few weeks earlier, she had felt alone. She believed everything depended on her. But now she understood something her father had always known. A farm is never built by one person. It is built by generations. By families. By neighbors. By people who choose to care when walking away would be easier. The corporation had money. They had lawyers. They had influence. But Elena had something much stronger. A community. The corporation thought they were negotiating with one farmer. They were wrong. They were facing a story. A story built from generations of sacrifice. A story carried by people who understood something money could never purchase. The value of the land was not only beneath the soil. It was in the people who protected it. And now, for the first time, Elena Bennett was not standing alone. For a while, Elena believed the hardest part was saying no. She was wrong. Saying no was only the beginning. Because when powerful people hear a refusal, they do not always walk away. Sometimes they change the conversation. Within days, headlines began appearing across the region like, "Local farmer blocks major agricultural investment." "Small farm decision could impact future development." "Experts question whether traditional farming can meet future demands." The words were carefully chosen. No one directly attacked Elena. Instead, they created doubt. They made people ask, was Elena protecting something important? Or was she standing in the way of progress? And that was the strategy. Not to defeat Elena in the field, but to defeat her in the minds of the people watching. At a corporate conference in the city, executives from Holloway Agricultural Group presented their own version of the story. They did not mention Elena by name. They did not need to. Their message was clear. The world was changing. Food demand was increasing. Climate challenges were growing. Agriculture needed innovation. And they argued that large-scale investment was the answer. Their presentation showed futuristic farms, advanced technology, mass production, robotic systems, a vision of agriculture controlled by efficiency. To many people watching, it looked impressive. It looked like progress. But Elena understood something they did not. Progress without responsibility could create a different kind of problem. The hardest conversation Elena had was not with the corporation. It was with her neighbors. The people she had known her entire life. At the community meeting, questions came quickly. How do we know this discovery will actually help anyone? What happens if the corporation brings jobs and you stop them? Are you protecting the future or protecting your family's past? The questions hurt. Not because they were cruel. Because Elena understood why people asked them. Farmers were struggling. Families needed stability. Communities needed opportunities. Elena stepped forward. I understand why you are asking these questions. The room became quiet. But I want everyone to understand something. She held up her father's journal. This is not about refusing change. This is about making sure change does not destroy what we need to survive. Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore was beginning to question everything. For years, he believed his job was simple. Numbers. Risk. Financial decisions. He had worked with farms that succeeded. And farms that failed. But Bennett Farm was different. The more he reviewed the documents, the more uncomfortable he became. Because the financial pressure being applied was not about protecting the bank. It was about forcing a decision. Richard looked at the paperwork again. The loan terms. The timelines. The strategy. And for the first time, he wondered, Was he helping protect a business? Or helping someone take something they had no right to control? But the biggest discovery came from Vivian Holloway. She was reviewing internal documents when she found something she had never seen before. A confidential strategy report. The words stopped her. Exclusive acquisition. Long-term control. Restricted access. Vivian read the pages again. This was not about helping farmers. This was not about sharing agricultural knowledge. The company wanted ownership. They wanted to control the discovery before anyone else could access it. For years, Vivian had told herself she was bringing progress. Now she wondered if she had been helping someone lock away the future. That night, Elena received another call. Vivian. But this time, something was different. Her voice had changed. Elena, you need to listen carefully. Elena became cautious. What happened? Vivian took a breath. I was wrong about what they wanted. The company does not want to invest in Bennett Farm. Elena looked toward the fields. Then what do they want? Vivian answered. They want to own the discovery. Then Elena asked, why are you telling me this? For several seconds, Vivian said nothing. Then she said, because someone needs to make sure they don't. For the first time, Elena understood the full size of the battle. The corporation was not trying to buy a farm. They were trying to control an idea. A different way of thinking about agriculture. A future where land was not just something to exploit, but something to understand. And now the people fighting for Bennett Farm were facing their biggest challenge yet. Because the corporation had money. They had influence. They had a plan. But Elena had something they never expected. Proof. A community. And the truth. The battle for Bennett Farm was no longer a negotiation. It was a fight over who would decide what the future of farming looked like. One side believed the future belonged to whoever controlled the most resources. The other believed the future belonged to those who protected the resources everyone depended on. And standing between those two visions was Elena Bennett. The following morning, Vivian Holloway entered the headquarters of Holloway Agricultural Group. The same building where she had spent years building her career. The same place where she had presented ideas, negotiated deals, and helped expand the company's influence around the world. But today felt different. Because for the first time, she was not walking into that building as an employee carrying out a mission. She was walking in as someone searching for the truth. Inside the executive conference room, the company's senior leadership was already waiting. The screens displayed one image. Bennett Farm. The executives looked confident. They believed the outcome was already decided. One of them smiled. Good work, Vivian. The acquisition process is moving exactly as planned. Vivian did not sit down. Instead, she placed the confidential documents on the table. Explain this. The room became quiet. The executives did not panic. They expected questions. We are not doing anything wrong, one executive explained. We are securing a valuable agricultural resource. Vivian looked at the documents. Securing? She pointed at the report. Restricted access. Exclusive ownership. Private research rights. The executive leaned back. Vivian, this is how business works. That sentence stayed with her. Because she had heard it before. Every time someone justified a decision because it was profitable. Every time people believed ownership mattered more than responsibility. She looked around the room. You are not trying to protect the discovery. You are trying to prevent anyone else from using it. The room became silent. One executive finally spoke. Be careful, Vivian. You are letting emotions interfere with business. But Vivian knew something now. This was not about emotion. It was about responsibility. She had spent years helping companies find opportunities. But she had never stopped to ask a question. Just because something can be controlled, does that mean it should be? She removed her company access card, placed it on the table. I thought I was helping build the future. She looked at them. But I refuse to help someone own it. And with that, Vivian walked away. But Vivian was not the only person facing a decision. Richard Whitmore sat in his office reviewing Bennett Farm's financial records one final time. For years, he had believed neutrality was professionalism. A banker did not choose sides. A banker looked at numbers. But numbers could hide stories. And behind every number was a person. A family. A history. A responsibility. Richard picked up the phone. He called Elena. I reviewed everything again. Elena listened. And? Richard took a breath. I believe the pressure being placed on your farm is not about financial risk. It's about forcing you to surrender. Elena was quiet. Then Richard said something she did not expect. I'm going to help you understand every option you have. With Vivian's information and Richard's guidance, Elena finally understood the strategy. The corporation had expected one thing: a farmer trying to protect a piece of land. They did not expect something else. A farmer prepared to share knowledge. Elena gathered Ava, Daniel, Rose, and the community together. She placed her father's journal on the table. We cannot fight them by becoming them. Everyone listened. We don't need more power. We need more understanding. Rose nodded. Daniel smiled. Ava looked toward the journal. Because she knew William Bennett would have agreed. The next morning, Elena made an announcement. Not through lawyers. Not through corporations. Through the community. She invited farmers, researchers, and agricultural experts to Bennett Farm. She opened the gates. Because the corporation's greatest weakness was something they never understood. Knowledge grows stronger when it is shared. The same discovery they wanted to control, Elena wanted to protect by teaching others. For years, Vivian Holloway believed the future belonged to the companies powerful enough to purchase it. But Bennett Farm taught her something different. The future does not belong to those who control knowledge. It belongs to those responsible enough to share it. And now the final battle was approaching. The corporation had one last move. But Elena Bennett was ready. The morning before the gathering, a letter arrived at Bennett Farm. Not a phone call. Calls could be hung up on. Not an email. Emails could be deleted without a second thought. A letter. Heavy paper. A real signature. The kind of letter meant to feel like it mattered. Elena opened it slowly. The number inside had changed. It was higher now. Far higher. The kind of number that rewrites a person's entire future in a single sentence. A new house. A paid-off life. Security that would outlast her. And maybe her children too. The words around that number were careful. Polished. Almost kind. But Elena had learned something in the last few weeks that no letter could undo. A bigger offer doesn't always mean a bigger opportunity. Sometimes, it just means someone is running out of patience. She folded the letter once. Then again. And she set it down, gently, beside her father's old leather journal. For the first time since this all began, the number on the page meant nothing to her. She smiled, because she finally understood why. By afternoon, Bennett Farm didn't look like itself anymore. Not because anything had changed about the land. Because of who was standing on it. Farmers came in from neighboring counties, dust still on their boots. Researchers came with notebooks and questions. Agriculture students came, eager and a little starstruck. Families came who had never once set foot on this property. People who had only heard the name, Bennett Farm, in passing. Now standing in its fields because they wanted to understand why it mattered. And then, right on schedule, the corporation arrived. Black SUVs rolling slowly up the dirt drive. Lawyers stepping out in suits too clean for a farm. Executives adjusting their cuffs like they were walking into a boardroom instead of a wheat field. For one long moment, the contrast was almost too sharp to look at directly. On one side, money, technology, influence. Decades of leverage built for exactly this kind of moment. On the other side, farmers, families, and a story that refused to be bought. Elena walked to the front of the crowd. She looked out at faces she recognized. People who had questioned her judgment, people who had quietly bet against her, and people who, somewhere along the way, had started showing up just to listen. She held her father's journal against her chest like it was something alive. For generations, she said, this farm has belonged to my family. But I've learned something these past few weeks. The crowd leaned in, almost without realizing it. Land is never truly owned by one generation. It's borrowed from the ones who come after us. A hush fell over the field. This farm is valuable, she continued. But not because of what someone can take from it. It's valuable because of what it can teach us. Elena didn't reveal a secret formula. She didn't hand over something that could make one person rich. She handed over the truth. She explained how generations of patient, careful farming had quietly protected this land long before anyone called it sustainable. How healthy soil built resilience that no amount of money could rush. How biodiversity strengthened a field in ways a spreadsheet could never capture. How patience, real, decades-long patience, produced results that no technology could replicate overnight. She shared her father's research, page by page. Not as a weapon to win a fight. As a lesson for anyone willing to learn it. The researchers leaned over the soil samples. Farmers asked question after question. Students filled pages of notes they'd be rereading for years. And slowly, something nobody in that field expected began to happen. The discovery outgrew Bennett Farm. Because the knowledge wasn't hidden in a vault anymore. It was alive, passed from hand to hand, mind to mind, exactly the way it was always meant to travel. The corporation had come prepared for a legal fight. They'd prepared for tense negotiations. They'd prepared for resistance, for delay, for every tactic a small farm might throw at a company with this much leverage. What they hadn't prepared for was something money couldn't touch. Trust. The instant Elena shared the knowledge openly, the entire playbook became useless. There was nothing left to quietly acquire. Nothing left to lock behind a contract. The information now belonged to everyone willing to learn from it. Vivian Holloway watched from the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, saying nothing. And in that silence, she understood exactly what had happened. Her company had spent months, and a great deal of money, trying to acquire something. Elena had spent that same time building something the company could never put a price tag on, a reason for people to protect it. Richard Whitmore stepped forward. The same banker who had once carried the weight of financial pressure into every conversation now carried something different. Fairness. He spoke plainly to the crowd, laying out the real financial picture behind Bennett Farm. He admitted, without hedging, that the farm had never actually been failing. It had only ever been undervalued. Because traditional financial systems are built to measure what can be calculated today, not what quietly compounds over a lifetime. The crowd absorbed the lesson in real time. Sometimes value hides in plain sight, simply because the people looking for it are measuring the wrong thing entirely. The corporation didn't lose because they ran out of resources. They lost because they misunderstood this farm from the very first offer. They saw Bennett Farm as a possession. Elena had always known it was a responsibility. They saw the discovery as something to own. Elena had always known it was something to share. And in the end, the greatest strength of all was the simplest one, understanding that not everything valuable should belong to just one person. The battle for Bennett Farm was over. But the story was only just beginning. Because somewhere between the first offer and the final letter, Elena had discovered something far more valuable than her father's secret. She had discovered her purpose. Months passed after the battle for Bennett Farm, and something nobody expected began to happen. The farm didn't become a monument to the past, frozen in place like a photograph nobody dared touch. It became a place of learning. Every morning, the fields filled with motion again, but a different kind than before. Farmers arrived carrying questions instead of complaints. Students arrived carrying notebooks instead of assumptions. Researchers arrived carrying equipment, eager to measure what generations of instinct had always known. Families arrived simply wanting to understand something the world had quietly forgotten. The crops still grew the way they always had. The animals were still fed at the same hour. The seasons still turned, indifferent to everything that had happened here. But Bennett Farm had something new running underneath all of it. It wasn't just a family farm anymore. It was a classroom with no walls. For most of her life, Elena believed she was protecting her father's farm. Now she understood something deeper. Her father never cared about a building, or a deed, or even one particular stretch of soil. He had spent his whole life trying to protect a way of thinking, a way of respecting the quiet, patient relationship between people and the land beneath them. Elena was still a farmer. That part of her hadn't changed. She still woke before the sun did. She still walked the rows checking for trouble before it found her. She still mended fences with the same calloused hands her father once had. But she had become something else too. A teacher. A guardian. A bridge built between one generation and the next, standing exactly where her father had once stood. One evening, Elena sat with Ava Ashford beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the property. The same tree where William Bennett used to sit for hours, thinking about a future he would never fully see. Ava looked out across the darkening fields. "Your father would be proud of you." Elena let the words settle before answering. "I used to think he left me a farm." Ava turned to her. "And what do you think now?" Elena's eyes drifted toward the students still working in the distance, lanterns swinging in the dusk. "Now I think he left me a responsibility." Ava nodded slowly, because that was the exact lesson William had spent his whole life trying to teach. Land doesn't become valuable because someone owns it. Land becomes valuable because someone chooses to care for it. Bennett Farm's story didn't stay within its own fences. It reached Rose Madeline. For years, Rose had protected her heritage cattle while half the world told her the past had no place in a modern future. But watching Elena's journey unfold changed something in her. Her ranch carried its own story. Its own hard-won lessons. Its own value the world had simply stopped noticing. And maybe, finally, it was time for that story to be told too. Because scattered across the countryside, in places nobody was filming, countless people were quietly protecting things the world had already written off. Vivian Holloway's life changed too, just not the way anyone at her old company would have predicted. Walking away wasn't easy. She lost her position. She lost her influence. She lost the comfortable certainty of having a powerful organization standing behind every decision she made. But she gained something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Purpose. She started working with agricultural groups who believed innovation and responsibility didn't have to be enemies, that the two could actually grow side by side. Because if Vivian learned one lesson from Bennett Farm that she'd carry for the rest of her career, it was this. Technology can improve farming. Investment can support communities. But neither one should ever replace respect for the land itself. The world remembered Bennett Farm because of a corporation's offer. Elena remembered it because of her father. Because before the investors arrived, before the headlines, before any of the battle that followed, there was simply a farmer who believed the land was worth understanding. William Bennett never became famous. He never landed on a magazine cover. He never got the recognition the world hands out to people it decides are important. But his greatest discovery was never meant to make him famous. It was meant to help someone else, someday, long after he was gone. And that's the real meaning of legacy. It isn't being remembered for keeping something valuable. It's being remembered for sharing it. The land remembers. It remembers the hands that cared for it. The generations that protected it, season after season, without asking for anything in return. The people who believed its value was worth more than any price tag a corporation could write. Bennett Farm was never just a farm. It was a story. A story about patience. A story about courage. A story about understanding that the future doesn't only belong to those who build something new. Sometimes, the future belongs to those who protect what already matters most.